You're here because you want to level up and you want to be an even better leader. You're already good at what you do, and yet you know there's still more that you can do on your journey, both personally and professionally. One of the most famous high performers in the world of business and finance is Warren Buffett. He ranked as the #1 investor of all time and is now one of the world's richest man. Warren said, you can improve your value by 50% just by learning communication skills and public speaking. That's why I wanted you to meet our special guest, Joel Weldon. Joel is my speaking skills coach, and Hall of Fame professional speaker. He is the creator of the ultimate speaking system for entrepreneurs and business owners, as well as executives to speak even more effectively by following one of the most important mindsets ordinary speakers just don't have. If you rated yourself using a 1 to 10 skill on your ability to speak in front of a group made up of your ideal audience members, what would that number be right now? It could be anywhere from a 1, which means I'm terrified to speak and I hate it, to a 10, which would be I love to speak and I'm amazing at it. Wherever you are on that scale, the mindset that Joel is going to share with you can help you be an even better speaker, communicated, and sales professional. Joel has paid to speak at over 3,000 events and has personally coached over 10,000 speakers. He is considered one of the highest performing speakers and is speaking skills coaches in Arizona. I have seen how he can turn an ordinary presentation into an extraordinary one. You will too. Please help me welcome the man who's going to help you be an even better speaker, Joel Weldon. Joel, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Max.
Well, let's just kick it off and get right into it. When you talk to people about speaking, what makes a great speaker in your opinion?
Well, that's a great question to start with. So as you're listening, think about that. You've been to meetings. You've heard hundreds, maybe thousands of speakers on an audio message, at a live event, on television. What do you think makes a great speaker? People say, well, they're great storytellers. They have humor. They have energy. But that's not what I would think. So here's something to consider. Based on over 50 years of professional speaking, it's one word: results. When a speaker speaks and gets the results based on what their objective was, that's a great presentation. And think about when you speak, whether you're doing a team meeting, whether you're being interviewed, whether you're making a sales presentation. What are the results that you want? And if you get the results you want, that was a great presentation. And it doesn't have to do with energy, storytelling, humor, charisma. And those can help, but not necessary. So that would be my answer for you. If you want to be a great speaker, focus on the result that you're looking to get and then get it.
Awesome. I love that. Can you give us an example of somebody that might not have a ton of charisma, but is an effective speaker?
Well, if you listen to, YouTube is so wonderful. There's so many videos, and you can find a video on almost anything. But when somebody opens a message, and in the first few minutes or seconds, you feel as a listener, oh, that's exactly what I wanted to know. Then the question is, how long will you listen? Well, you would listen as long as you're getting what you want. And so many times people say, you got to be short. The attention span is 20 seconds. You got to keep it under 2 minutes. You can't have a video over 10. Well, Evan Carmichael, who's one of the leading YouTube experts, and he's got over 500 million views of his video, taught me and other people that I'm familiar with that the best message needs to be at least 10 minutes, and the most watched YouTube videos are over an hour. And since we're doing a podcast, Max, think about Joe Rogan. He does 2 and 3 hour long podcast interviews. Why? Because what they're hearing is important or relevant to the audience. So if you think about that concept that time isn't the factor, and then you asked an example of somebody who would not be considered a great speaker. First one that comes to mind would be Warren Buffett. Warren is a genius at investing. And he's just a low-key guy. He drives a pickup truck. He lives in the same home that he's lived in for decades. And he's yet one of the wealthiest men in the world. And when he does his meetings, his annual events for Berkshire Hathaway, and they have sellout crowds of tens of thousands of people hanging on his every word. Because he's a great speaker? No. Because what he's saying is so important, powerful, and relevant. And that should be your goal as a communicator. If you're talking about something that's relevant and important and can connect with your audience, they're going to listen. So that would be an example. And I think one of the things to think of, because people are always concerned about, well, I'm afraid to speak. And that's why it's always one of the top fears. They have that book of fears. Burning to death in a fire is below speaking in front of a group. So there's so many people that just feel speaking is not for me. But Warren would be a great example. He would be somebody from a speaking skills standpoint that could do other things a little better. But as you quoted in the introduction, he said you can increase your value by learning public speaking skills. And he has learned them over his many decades of being a great investor. He's not a terrible speaker, but he's not a Tony Robbins. So does that make sense?
Oh, that makes a ton of sense. Well, talk about the point you just made, because I think this would be important. It landed for me and it really encouraged me. That's why, I've hired you as a speaking skills coach. But talk about how nobody is born a great speaker. I'm sure there are some, but talk about your statement, no one's born a great speaker. Are there some people that maybe just have more charisma to start with, or how do you think of it?
Well, let's use athletics as an example. There are some people that have natural athletic ability. They have eye-hand coordination. They have fast muscle twitch. They have a body that's built for a specific sport. However, that doesn't mean they're going to become a world-class athlete without training, coaching, practice, discipline. To get to that highest level, Tom Brady would be an example. He wasn't that great physically, but he made up for it in his practice and dedication and mental ability combined with fairly good athletic skills. So yes, there are some people who are naturally enthusiastic, who have a great sense of humor. It's an innate thing, but it's not necessary. And I certainly would be an example. If anybody ever told people in my high school class of 4,000 people that I'd be a professional speaker, they'd be laughed at. I never said a word in high school. I was terrified to talk in front of a group. Never got up in front of my high school class to give a book report. Took a failing grade. And maybe you can relate to that. Maybe you were uncomfortable when you were younger speaking. But you can learn how to speak. And in my case, I was 28 years old before I ever stood up in front of a group and talked. And then somebody came back in the room after I finished and said I was the worst speaker they had ever heard in their whole life. And I probably was. Now, if you stop the clock right there and then said, oh, and by the way, he's going to become a professional speaker. Oh, yeah, right. He did such a terrible job here. But the man who told me that in 1969 said, but I'm going to fix you. And he took me to a Toastmasters club. And that was the change. In September of 1969, I attended the Tempe, Arizona Toastmasters Club, and it was life-changing because I learned that speaking is a skill. And if you learn a skill, you can get better at it. So whatever your natural ability is, it doesn't matter. You can learn to be effective, and you can just be you. You don't have to be a performer. You don't have to be outgoing and high energy if you're low-keyed and low energy. And that's one of the things I've learned in watching thousands of speakers. The most effective speakers are themselves. And if you will just be you as you're listening, just be you. It takes no effort to be you. You woke up this morning being you. You didn't have to wake up and say, oh, I'm going to pretend to be. No, you were without pretending who you were. If you woke up happy, that's how you are. And if you woke up worried or scared, well, that's how you are too. And that's how you should speak. So does that make sense, Max?
It makes a ton of sense, especially after knowing you and kind of hearing you talk about this message. You know, there's a phrase that sticks out in my mind that I want you to talk about. And I hear it from two people in a loving way. And the first one's from you. And that statement is, no one cares. Talk about like why you say that and when, you know, why that is a focal point when somebody is speaking and what that allows them to focus on.
Well, you're bringing up a coaching technique. Well, if you think, as you're listening, think of the words that most speakers begin any kind of presentation. And if you will pay attention from now on, I will guarantee you that in over 75% of the cases, you're going to hear a statement like this. I'm so excited to be here. Or I've been really looking forward to sharing these ideas. Or this is my favorite subject. Or I just can't wait to give you this message. No one cares that you're excited. No one cares that you've been looking forward to it. So we teach our clients 3 simple words to open any message. You're here because. You're here because you want to be a better communicator. You're here because you want to be an even better speaker. You're here because, if you open with you're here because, you don't talk about yourself because no one cares. Like right now in this podcast, you don't really care anything about Joel Weldon. That's not why you're on this podcast. You're listening to this podcast because you're thinking, maybe this guy can give me something I can use when I have to make a presentation, a team meeting, being on an interview, on a podcast, doing a webinar, doing a presentation in front of a live group, doing a video. Maybe I can pick up something. That's what you care about. So let me give you one 4-letter word that if you will use it, it will make your presentations even better. So let's say as you're listening to Max in this interview, and he says to you as the listener, I have an idea that will help make you more money. And then he says, and I have another idea that will help you get in better shape. Now, do those sound like good statements to you? Well, let's listen carefully to those words. This is going to help you make more money because you're probably not making a lot of money right now. You're probably struggling. This is going to help you get in better shape because, I can tell looking at you, you're not really in great shape. But if you will add a 4-letter word before you use the word more or better. So let's put it in these 2 sentences. This idea will help you earn even more money. This is going to help you get in even better shape. What did that one word do? It elevated you, and it made an impact in a positive way. Sure, you're making money now, but you can do even better. Sure, you look like you're in pretty good shape, but you can get in even better shape. So there's a speaking tip. In your emails, in your speaking, when you use more or better, just drop in even and watch the difference. Now, that's the power of just one word. And that's why we call it the ultimate speaking system. All these ideas come from a program that we put together to help people be even better communicators. So there's a little tip that you can use. Did you like that one, Max?
I absolutely like it. I've heard it before, and I'm still taking notes on it because you can't hear it enough. We started to go down this path a little bit, but I want to get in a little bit more. Talk about how speaking is speaking effectively is not a performance act; it's a connecting act. Talk about why that is, and that kind of why that's important.
Well, think about your experience again when you have watched or learned something from a speaker. Now that could be on a YouTube video. It could be on a podcast like this with Max. It could be at a live event. It could be at a team meeting for your organization, either that you're running or you're part of it. How do you feel connected? So here's an example think about this. Have you ever been at a movie theater watching a movie, and then based on what was happening on the screen, suddenly you jumped and you got scared? There was a scary scene in the movie and you flinched. Have you ever had that happen?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm going to say, Max says yes, it's happened to me, and I'm sure it's happened to you. Now, let's think about what happened to you at that moment. In your mind, you weren't in a movie theater. If you knew you were sitting there with your friends with a bag of popcorn, watching a movie, and something scary happened, you wouldn't have done anything. You're in a movie theater. But somehow that director, that actor created the feeling that you were in the movie, and that terrible, scary thing that was about to happen was going to happen to you because you were in the message. And that's the key to connecting with an audience. How do you make your audience feel that the message is for them? They're not just listening, and hopefully you're picking that up now. I'm not talking to Max. I'm talking to you as the listener. And how do I know your name? It's easy. It's 3 letters. You. I'm not talking to all of you, many of you, a group of you. I'm talking to singular you. Whoever that is right now that you are, that's who this message is for. And what if you did that when you spoke? And you can include everybody in a singular personal pronoun of you. As an example, we were talking about Warren Buffett. You might know who Warren Buffett is, or maybe you never heard of him. We just included everybody in that statement. You might be highly motivated every morning when you jump out of bed. Or maybe it takes you a while to get going in the morning. Can you see how the continuum can go from far left to far right, but it still includes everyone? But I didn't say some of you might wake up with a lot of energy, and maybe others of you take a while to get going. Why don't you do the same thing? Talk to one person. If there's 1,000 people in front of you, talk to one. And I got this idea from a man named Arthur Godfrey. And I don't think, Max, you know who that is.
No, I don't.
Well, it's way before your time. In the 40s and 50s, radio was king. Television was just kind of starting out. And the number one talk show host in America on the radio was a man named Arthur Godfrey. And his show was always number one. He won all kinds of awards. And then television came out. And what do you think happened to radio listeners? Well, they left television, they left radio and went to television. That next year, he went to television, was still the number one morning show in America. And people were fascinated. How could you go from number one radio when most radio show hosts disappeared? He was just as popular on television. And I happened to catch an interview of him many years later before he passed on. And they said, Arthur, how is it possible that you could be so good on radio and then on television and people just love listening to you? Do you have a secret? He said, I do have a secret. Well, what is it? He said, I just talked to one person and their name is you. So what if you did that? Use the Arthur Godfrey connection. Then people feel it's relevant. If you're talking to team members and you have your employees there, you might be new to our organization, or maybe you were here in 1972 when we founded the company. You just got everybody there. But when you use plural, people think, well, I think they're talking to the guy over there, or he's talking to the lady over there. So that's one way you keep that connection. Put them into a story. Make it something relevant to them. That answer that question, Matt?
That answers it. And then kind of skipping ahead, another thing that I thought I had kind of written down here I wanted to cover, because you and I had talked about this. And again, I got to learn this all again. I don't know. Most of these things you can't learn enough, in my opinion. I don't think you learn it, you've got it. Like, I think that your coaching skills are so effective. But talk about how storytelling isn't always effective.
Okay. This is a technique many professional speakers use. So now we're going to welcome our next speaker, Max Hansen. Come on out and tell us about how to grow your business. And then the speaker would come out. Now, Max wouldn't do this because he's much more advanced than ordinary. But an ordinary speaker would. So there I was in a state of depression, and I was struggling. Many speakers open with a personal story that has no awareness for the audience of what is this about? So one of the tools we've created in our ultimate speaking system is always open with the point of the story. Ordinary speakers end with the point of the story. And from my experience, half the audience is left. They never get to the end of the story because there was no relevancy. So here's an example. Have you ever felt frustrated and afraid and lost and have no way out in your mind, and you just feel it's almost a hopeless situation? But you know that there's got to be an answer, but you don't know how to find it. Well, maybe this story will help you use two tools when you're ever in that situation. Okay, now I just made that up, but that's the point of this next story. Or maybe you're looking for a new career and you don't know what you should be doing in the future. How do you know where you should spend your time, effort, and energy if you're not happy in your job? Well, here's a story that might put that in perspective for you and give you some clues of how you can get out of that trap. So that's the suggestion on a story. If people just open with a story because it's an interesting story to the speaker, it doesn't mean it's interesting to the audience because no one cares unless they know what the point of the story is. If you've ever been discouraged, this story might be helpful for you. If you've ever been looking for more money and finding this might be a helpful way to do it. So that's one suggestion with a story. The next suggestion is going back to that movie theater example on a scary scene where you jump. How can you put your audience into your story? So let's say you're telling a story, and I started a little bit. I told you that in 1969, I attended a Toastmasters meeting to overcome my fear of speaking and learned that it's a learned skill. So come back in time to Brad's Coffee Shop in Tempe, Arizona. You're my invisible partner as you're listening to this podcast. And you walk in next to me and you see all of these people at a Toastmasters meeting, and you're the only stranger. Nobody knows you and you don't know anybody in the room. And then the president starts the meeting and he sees you sitting there next to me and say, I see we some guests there. What's your name? Pointing to me. And you watch me stand up and say, well, Joel Weldon, Scottsdale, Arizona. And I was so nervous and fumbling around just saying my name. Okay. And that's what happened at that first Toastmasters meeting. And by the way, that was 56 years ago. And I yesterday was at my Toastmasters meeting in Scottsdale, Arizona at Chat's Toastmasters, still an active Toastmaster, helping other people overcome their fear of speaking. But putting you in the story is a way of developing that connection you asked about, Max. Making it relevant to them, opening with the point of a story, put them into the story. Do you like that idea?
I love it. Well, get more into, because I think a lot of people have you talked about the fear, how high that fear is of speaking. How do you get speakers to overcome the fear? I mean, obviously, including the audience in a story, you just gave that example, but talk about some other things when you've worked with people that may be really nervous and like they have this fear. How do you help them get over it?
Well, it's a very real thing. And Jerry Seinfeld, the great comedian and the star of Seinfeld television show, had a wonderful line. He said, at a funeral, the person giving the eulogy would rather be in the casket. In other words, death would be better than having to speak in front of a group. Why is that? Well, from my experience, and see if this makes sense as you're listening, it's self-consciousness. It's wondering, well, are they going to like what I have to say? Will they understand what I'm going to say? Or how do I look? How am I, my voice going to be good? Am I going to stumble? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Most of the fear, from my experience, is because of self-direction. So the solution is get yourself out of the way. It's not about you. It's about the audience. So here's a story to prove how that could work. So as you're listening, just imagine that you were a paramedic and you were heading to work and you were dressed in a white outfit because you worked at a hospital, and you were driving late at night in a remote area heading to work at the hospital, and you see an accident ahead of you, and there's a car turned over and there's a man laying in the road bleeding profusely from his leg. Would you stop and help him as a paramedic? Max, play the role of the paramedic. Would you help him? Or would you say, I got to get to work? Just leave?
Sure, I'd help him.
Sure, yeah. Would you know what to do? You're a paramedic. Sure,
Yeah,
you would.
I would know.
You would know what to do. So as you see this man, you know you got to stop the bleeding. But to do that, you got to get down on the ground and you got to get a tourniquet on his leg, and you got your white clothes on and you got white shoes on. You're going to the hospital and you get all covered in blood. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Or would you be completely oblivious to Max and be 100% focused on that man bleeding to death? Where would you focus?
I would focus on him.
100%. Well, that's the idea of getting yourself out of the way. If you have to speak and feel uncomfortable, get yourself out of the way. Don't focus on what you're going to look like or sound like. If you've prepared a message, you understand who your audience is, just be you and get yourself out of the way. It's not about you. It's about what you can give to your audience, just like that paramedic. The full focus would be on saving that accident victim, not on their clothes, not what they're going to do. How am I going to go to work? Do I have to go back home? I'm going to be late. Nobody's going to be happy. None of that entered into their mind because it was all about that patient or that victim. And that's what you need to think of too. And it makes a difference when you can just be you. If you have to try to be enthusiastic and you're not enthusiastic, you're going to be very uncomfortable. So here's a story to prove why it's important to be you and what can happen if you are you, even if you're terrified to speak. So come back in time. This was a Fortune 500 company, hired me to speak at their national sales meeting, a 3-day meeting. I was the closing speaker. It was the last day. They had buses to get the whole group. There was about 200 or 300 people that had to go to the airport. And I was going to wrap it up. And I'm sitting there in the morning. You're sitting next to me as you're listening. And the president says, now, before I introduce you, we've got to get our chief financial officer, Bob, up there. He gives these numbers. I just want to prepare you. This is the worst part of our sales meeting, but we can't do the numbers until the last day. So we got to get him up here. But we brought you in here to kind of bring the energy back up because he's the worst speaker that we have. But he's a brilliant accountant and chief financial officer. And he's the only one that knows these numbers. So he's going to give them, and it's going to be terrible. And he wasn't exaggerating. The MC introduces Bob, who's the CFO of the company, and he had glasses kind of hanging on his nose, and he kind of waddled, and he had a big notebook in his hand, and he looked down, and he walked from the backstage to the lectern, and he puts the notebook on the desk, and he looks down, and he just starts talking about the numbers, and it was terrible. And the CEO says near the end to me, can I hire you to coach him? Do we do this every year? And we go through this. Everybody's look around. Everybody falling asleep. But they need to know these numbers, and we have no other solution. And he's the one that has the credibility because everybody knows how smart he is. Would you work with him and get him ready for next year? I said, fine, as long as he wants to. So I contacted Bob. We got on the phone. He said, are you going to fix me? I said, no. He said, well, what do I got to do next year? I said, Just do exactly what you did this year, except two different things. Let me write your introduction for the MC to read, and then I'm going to give you your opening comments. And then just do what you did today. He said, that's going to work? I said, well, let's see what happens. So during the year, we talked about some different things. The meeting comes up. Now, fast forward, you come back to this same group in a different city, and Boring Bob, that's what they called him, is now introduced with this basic introduction. And I'm paraphrasing it, but it's pretty accurate. Well, the next part of our meeting is something that nobody looks forward to, because now we're going to go over the sales numbers, and we're going to have our chief financial officer, Bob, give them to you. And just so you know, around the office, we call him Boring Bob. He is really boring. If you were to look up the word boring in the dictionary, you'd see Bob's picture in there. Now the audience is starting to laugh. However, these numbers are so important for your success this year. So here's the new rules, because in the past, everybody seems to fall asleep when Bob's talking. You can't do that. So if the person next to you starts nodding off, it is your responsibility to wake them up. Now, for those in the front row, and then I wrote on the introduction for the MC, point to everybody in the first row. And then he said, for those of you pointing to everybody in the front row, if Bob falls asleep while he's talking, you got to rush up on stage and wake him up. Well, by now the audience is hysterical and laughing and clapping. And then he says, and now please help me welcome Boring Bob. And they gave him a standing ovation. Now, it was funny, it was relevant, it was all true, and they just thought it was so great that he would put up with it. So Bob comes out with his notebook, his glasses are down, puts it on the leg turn, and then I gave him this opening. And here's what he said. Now, remember, the point of this story is to be you. So far, he's totally Bob. And he looks down, no eye contact, looks at the microphone. He said, well, thank you for that introduction. And yeah, I am kind of boring, but some of you know Evelyn and I, we've been married for 27 years. And on our first date, she slapped me. I wasn't getting fresh. She just thought I was dead. Well, he had burst into applause and laughter. And he said, and now as you look at me, I kind of look like I'm dead, but I'm not. I'm so excited about this company and the year that you've had and the year that we're going to have this year. And these numbers are going to prove it to you. But it just doesn't show on the outside. I don't have that excitement and that energy that our national sales manager has. But I want to tell you, I'm so excited on the inside. So let's get started with the numbers. And then he went into the numbers. And at the end of that presentation, they gave him a standing ovation. And on the feedback, because I had them using feedback cards, actually a written card where they evaluated all the parts of the 3-day meeting, he rated as the highest speaker. For 10 years, I kept following up with the CEO, and I had done other meetings with him. And I said, how's Bob doing? Oh, well, I told you how smart he was. So he spends the whole year collecting boring jokes. And every year he opens with another joke on how boring he is. And throughout his presentation, he pulls out things on how boring he is. And he has been our number 1 rated speaker every year since he's been doing that. Now, that's an example of what it takes to be a great speaker. He got results because the numbers were so important to these people. He was himself. And why he was able to do it so comfortably is he wasn't trying to be like the national sales manager, Mr. Enthusiasm and charisma. He didn't have any of that. He could just be Boring Bob. And he had the numbers, and he got results. So hopefully you'll remember Boring Bob. If you're not a Tony Robbins high-energy person, it's okay. Be you.
Man, I love that. Buy the book, Bob, or Boring Bob. I hired a CFO for one of my friends one time, and I was joking around in the hiring process, and I called him Buy the Book, Bob. and nobody calls him that, but he's a CFO. And sometimes when I see that guy, I'm like, how's By the Book Bob? And he kind of gives me a funny look because nobody refers to him by that. But that reminded me of the Bob story. So speaking of good messages, so what the audience has to understand is I have had the luxury of being in Genius Network with Joel, and I get to see people give 10-minute talks where they're coached by Joel. And then after the talk, he talks about what they did well and maybe some areas of opportunity. So I get to see this live, which is absolutely amazing. But talk about, so we're in, and the thing that has stood out at me is getting a really good message in 10 minutes is difficult. I started to pick up on that. And so talk about the anatomy. If you were to give a 10-minute presentation on what the anatomy of a really good presentation would be.
Okay. Well, just think about Super Bowl time. Every year we have Super Bowl. Last year they were $7 million for a 30-second commercial. So that's $14 million for 1 minute. That's $140 million for a 10-minute commercial. But why would they pay $7 million for 30 seconds? Because in 30 seconds, an advertising agency, a marketing team can put together a message that will generate tens of millions of dollars of sales for that product, service, or company. It doesn't have to be long. It has to be effective. So 10 minutes is actually a lot of time for any message. And having done, you mentioned Genius Network, which I've been a member for 11 years now, and I've coached over 500 of our 10-minute talk speakers during that time. And what makes a great message, not necessarily any 10-minute talk, but any talk, 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute talk, is what we said in the beginning, results. What will the audience do as a result of what they're hearing? And the way you accomplish that is accept the fact you know too much. If you're talking about something that you're passionate about, that you're experienced in, that's part of your business and career, you know everything about it. So the first thing is think like your audience. I call it TLA. Think like your audience. Don't think like you. Max, you know about hiring people and how to find the right people and do all of those things. But if you only had 10 minutes to explain one of the most important things about taking on a new position, you're going to have to really focus. So one technique is, maybe there are 10 things. Let's use this on taking a new career move and the 10 most important things. Well, since we only have 10 minutes, I'm going to go quickly over the 10, and we're going to focus on just 2 of them. So that's another technique. You can identify that there are many steps, but we're going to just focus on 1 or 2 or 3. And it's called the magic of 3. 3 is a very powerful thing in a short presentation, even in a long presentation. The other thing is making it simple, keeping it clear. As you're listening, think about the last car you bought. I know you must have bought some kind of car. Let's say it was a new car, not a used car. And if you go to a dealership and you look at a car, if you had a real car salesman that knew everything about automobiles and was a real motorhead, that salesperson could probably have 400 or 500 things about that car that they could tell a prospect. Axle ratio, compression on the cylinders, the disc brakes, all of that. The chances are they never talk about that. They talk about the size of the backup, the computer screen, how comfortable the seats are, the sound system, the trade-in value, the mile, a couple of things. So that's what you need to think of. And then you would make a purchase of a car. The second biggest investment you'd make personally, aside from your home, is your automobile or truck. And you do it very quickly on a couple of those things. I love the color, and it's just so comfortable, and I love the sound system. I'll take it. And you make that investment of $80,000 or $100,000 or $50,000, whatever kind of car you're looking at. And that's what you need to think of too. Your audience doesn't need to know everything you know. They just need to know enough to say yes. That's it. What's the most important things about your subject that would get them to say yes to your call to action? And I don't mean that that's selling something. A call to action can be do something, think something, or feel something. So based on what we've said, a call to action so far, if we were ending right now, which we're not, we still have 5 minutes left. The call to action would be use the word even before more and better. Open with 3 words. You're here because. Get yourself out of the way. Make it about your audience, not about you. Put them in the story. Get yourself out of the way. Be you, whether that's boring Bob or not. Be you. And if you do that, you're going to be an even better speaker. Okay, pick one of those things. That could be the call to action. So when you give a call to action and they do it, that's a great presentation. And you can do that in 10 minutes. If you keep it simple and not try to cover like that automobile salesperson said, no, I'm going to tell them everything about that car or truck, everything. No one cares. What do they need to know about? Not what you love. And when mentioning that, I was just thinking, how many times have you heard speakers say, I love this story? Or, I just love this quote. No one cares you love it. Why don't you say, you're going to love this story? Here's a quote that will really be helpful for you in the future. Make it about your audience, not about you. Get yourself out of the way. So is that helpful?
Oh my gosh, so helpful. And what a master class in him just summing up the points for takeaways because he's focusing on you, the audience. Talk about the other thing that stands out at me that is super effective. And like you talked about it, one of the first meetings I was at, but how you use black paper for the messaging. Because I think it's genius because it blends right in. You can't, but talk about how that came to be and like why that's so important.
Well, I just happen to have this piece of paper here. But normally when people use notes, and there's nothing wrong with you using notes, and I'm just pulling something out of Max's file here. This is something. So this is what it looks like when you have a piece of paper. It moves around and flops around. But if you mount that piece of paper on a cardstock, 67-pound cardstock, flat black, it doesn't flap around. And notice right now, even though I have a black shirt on, you can see it, but which looks more obvious?
Oh, yeah.
So that's it's little things. And these are all things in our ultimate speaking system that I've captured after, over 50 years as a Hall of Fame speaker, watching thousands of speakers, putting together these little tips on how you can be an even better communicator. And everything you've heard comes out of this system. And that's what you need, a system. So you're not thinking, how do I open? Open with, you're here because. How do you end? And here's the way you end. What if you used one word? Imagine. Now, I'm not ending yet because Max is going to wrap it up, but imagine. If you use just one of the ideas from what you've heard, how much better your next presentation can be. And if you got yourself out of the way, you're going to be so much more relaxed and you're going to be yourself. That's what can happen when you use speaking to grow your business and get yourself out of the way. Bam. End with something, putting them into the situation you've described and make believe it already happened. Imagine it's a year from now and you, and they're doing what you just told them to do. So in a final minute, I got 22 words for our listener. Should I do it now and then you wrap us up?
Yeah, let's do it now. One thing I was thinking about is ever since I've heard, a lot of this is so good and I've heard it. And ever since I heard it, every time I hear a great speaker, all the elements that you talk about are there. The clarity, they tell you what they're going to say, they say it, and then they tell you what they said, and then they wrap it up, and put you in there. So it's been awesome. Like, this is awesome. I think the listeners are going to get so much from this. And I think like I do, I notice and effective speakers, all these components that you're talking about, now they stick out and I notice them. So I hope the audience takes this away and put some of this to work. But yes, I'd love for you, any last words as we kind of start to wrap this up?
Yeah, 22 words as you're listening. If you want to be an even better speaker, here they are. Speak to your audience about what they need in an organized way they can follow, and get yourself out of the way. And then you can make it a great day every day.
Man, I love that. I love that. Well, that was a masterclass on how to become a better speaker. And the fun part is this is my coach. And the one thing I'd want to, Joel's very humble. The one thing that I love about Joel, when you hire Joel, you pay one time and you have Joel for the rest of your life, for the rest of his life, depending on your age. But he might outlive most everybody on the line that he's on. But I always thought that was super interesting. When you hire somebody, typically it's like a project thing. With Joel, when you hire Joel, you have Joel forever to help you with your speaking and communication. So all of the different presentations you have, you get the whole guy. So Joel, thank you so much for today. You've been listening to the Built on Purpose podcast, brought to you by Y Scouts. You can listen to all of our past and future podcasts at yscouts.com. Thanks a lot for listening.